Certified case files. Genuine evidence. Objective truth. You are viewing Bodycam incident reports.
Stand up now. Manager says you're trespassing.
I paid for my food. I'm disabled. My wife is on her way.
I don't care. When I say go, you go.
You're escalating this for no reason, officer.
Stop resisting.
I'm not
Back up.
resisting. You kicked my can.
Back up. Don't interfere.
Officer Derek Sneed was 32 years old, standing 6'1" in a uniform that was pressed just a little too perfectly. His boots shined to a mirror gloss that betrayed the fact that he rarely stepped out of his patrol car unless he was looking for a fight. He had been with the department for 6 years, and in that time he had cultivated a reputation. To his drinking buddies on the shift, he was a proactive enforcer, a sheepdog, keeping the wolves at bay. To the Internal Affairs Division, he was a liability in waiting a ticking time bomb of arrogance and aggression that had already generated 7 complaints for discourtesy and excessive force. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon, under the harsh fluorescent lights of a fast food joint, Derek Sneed wasn't just making another mistake. He was walking into a buzzsaw that would cost the city of Savannah $6.5 million and end his career in absolute disgrace. Sneed was the kind of officer who believed that respect was something you demanded, not something you earned. He operated on a hair-trigger assumption that anyone who didn't immediately cower before his badge was hiding something. He had a history of escalating minor infractions into major confrontations, a pattern that his supervisors had noted in performance reviews as needs improvement in community relations, a bureaucratic euphemism for he bullies people he thinks he can get away with bullying. He had convinced himself that his intuition was flawless, that he could spot a criminal simply by the cut of their clothes or the color of their skin. When the call came in from Liberty Burger about a vagrant refusing to leave, Sneed didn't ask for details. He didn't ask if the suspect was armed or violent. He just heard vagrant and filled in the rest of the picture with his own prejudices. The dispatcher had relayed the information. Subject is a black male, approximately 60 years old, loitering in the dining area, making customers uncomfortable. That was all Sneed needed. In his mind, he was already rehearsing the arrest. He wasn't going there to investigate. He was going there to clear the trash. He parked his cruiser right at the fire lane lights, flashing unnecessarily, announcing his presence with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He walked through the double glass doors with his hand resting on his belt, scanning the room not for the truth, but for a target. What Sneed failed to realize, what his arrogance blinded him to, was that he wasn't dealing with a vagrant. He wasn't dealing with a criminal. He was about to lay hands on a man whose boots Sneed wasn't fit to shine. He was about to challenge the integrity of a man who had led battalions into hell and brought them back home. The tragedy of Derek Sneed was not just that he was a bad cop. It was that he was a small man with a little bit of power, and he had finally found a mountain he couldn't climb. And the city was going to pay the price for his ego. Before we get into the details of this confrontation, I want to ask you folks something. Do you think police departments do enough to weed out officers with a history of bias before something like this happens? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Command Sergeant Major retired Elias Thorne sat in the corner booth of the Liberty Burger on Abercorn Street, carefully nursing a vanilla milkshake. At 62 years old, Elias was a man carved from granite and grace. He wore a faded Army Ranger baseball cap, a pristine white polo shirt tucked into khaki trousers, and sturdy walking shoes. Leaning against the table next to him was a black aluminum cane, battered and scratched, a constant companion since an IED outside of Fallujah had rearranged the anatomy of his left hip and leg in 2004. Elias wasn't loitering. He was waiting. His wife of 40 years, Martha, was next door at the pharmacy picking up her blood pressure medication, a process that always took 20 minutes longer than it should. Elias had decided to grab a shake and wait out of the midday Georgia heat. He had bought his shake paid with cash and taken the receipt. He had been sitting there for perhaps 25 minutes, checking emails on his phone, scrolling through pictures of his 3 grandchildren, and minding his own business. To understand the gravity of what was about to happen, you have to understand who Elias Thorne was. He hadn't just served. He had defined service. Enlisting at 18, he had spent 3 decades in the United States Army. He had jumped into Grenada, patrolled the streets of Mogadishu, and done 3 tours in the sandbox during the global war on terror. He held the Silver Star for gallantry in action, 2 Bronze Stars with valor, and a Purple Heart. He was a man who had looked death in the face so many times that a rude fast food manager or a belligerent cop didn't register as a threat, they registered as a nuisance. The Liberty Burger was busy that Tuesday. The lunch rush was in full swing, a chaotic symphony of sizzling grease shouting order numbers and the crying of toddlers. The air smelled of salt and sanitizer. Elias liked the noise. It reminded him of the mess halls in basic training, a dull roar of humanity that allowed him to be alone with his thoughts. He sat with his back to the wall, a habit he never broke, not even in retirement, watching the door, scanning the room. It wasn't paranoia. It was muscle memory. He watched the business people in their suits, the construction workers covered in drywall dust, and the teenagers skipping school. He judged none of them. He was just a grandfather enjoying a cold drink on a hot day. But while Elias was watching the room, someone was watching him with a very different set of eyes. Elias had noticed the manager, a young man in a polyester tie that was too short, glancing at him repeatedly from behind the counter. Elias had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who was trying to categorize him, trying to figure out why a black man with a cane was taking up a 4-top table during the rush. Elias had offered a polite nod the first time their eyes met. The manager hadn't nodded back. Elias checked his watch. Martha would be done in about 10 minutes. He took another sip of his shake, oblivious to the fact that his mere presence had triggered a chain reaction in the manager's mind. Elias Thorne, who had commanded thousands of soldiers and held the security of nations in his hands, was about to be treated like a trespasser in his own hometown. He had fought for the freedom of others to eat in places like this, yet here he was, viewed as an intruder. It's a bitter irony that many veterans know too well returning home to a country that sometimes refuses to see them. Kyle Vance, the 26-year-old shift manager at Liberty Burger, considered himself a visionary in the world of fast food. He had been managing this location for 8 months and had big dreams of moving up to district manager. Kyle was obsessed with metrics, drive-through times, food waste percentages, and what he called lobby atmosphere. He wanted his Liberty Burger to be the flagship of the district, a place that looked good on corporate reports. Kyle also had a problem with bias, though he would never admit it. He prided himself on running a clean ship, but his definition of clean often involved removing people he deemed undesirable. He had called the police on teenagers for laughing too loud. He had kicked out a breastfeeding mother because she wasn't covering up enough. And today, his target was the older black man in the corner. In Kyle's eyes, Elias Thorne wasn't a decorated veteran waiting for his wife. He was a problem. Kyle saw the cane and assumed disability fraud or beggar prop. He saw the faded Ranger hat and assumed it was bought at a thrift store. He saw a black man sitting alone for 30 minutes with just a milkshake and assumed he was homeless, stealing Wi-Fi and keeping good customers from having a seat. It didn't matter that there were 3 other empty tables. It didn't matter that Elias was well-dressed. Kyle had a narrative in his head this man didn't belong. Kyle watched Elias from the expo window. "He's still there," Kyle muttered to a cashier. "He's been nursing that shake for half an hour. It's probably warm milk by now. He's just loitering." "He bought it, Kyle." The cashier, a high school student named Sarah, said quietly. "He's not bothering anyone." "It's the principal, Sarah," Kyle snapped, adjusting his name tag. "We run a business, not a shelter. If I let him stay, then 5 more show up tomorrow. It brings down the property value. It makes the families uncomfortable." Kyle walked out from behind the counter, puffing out his chest. He approached Elias's table, not with a customer service smile, but with a look of annoyance. "Sir." Kyle set his voice loud enough to turn heads. "You've been here a long time. You need to order something else or give up the table. We have paying customers waiting." Elias looked up, his expression calm. "I am a paying customer, son. I bought this shake. I'm just waiting on my ride. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. "This isn't a waiting room," Kyle retorted. "We have a 20-minute policy for consumption during peak hours. You're past that. You need to leave." Elias gestured to the empty tables nearby. "There are open seats. I'm not blocking anyone, and I've never heard of a 20-minute rule. It's manager's discretion." Kyle lied, his face flushing red because he hated being challenged. "Look, I don't want a scene. Just go or I'm calling the police for trespassing." Elias slowly set his cup down. He looked Kyle in the eye, a look that had withered drill sergeants decades ago. "I'm not leaving until my wife gets here. I paid for my food. I'm minding my business." Kyle didn't like that look. He felt small, and he hated feeling small. He spun around and marched back to the office. He picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency line, but his voice carried the urgency of a bank robbery. "This is the manager at Liberty Burger on Abercorn. I have a male subject refusing to leave. He's loitering, he's hostile, and he's scaring my customers. I need an officer removed immediately." He hung up, feeling a surge of power. He had done his part. He had protected his lobby atmosphere. He had no idea he had just lit the fuse on a stick of dynamite. Officer Derek Sneed pulled his cruiser onto the curb, the tires crunching over the landscaping bark. He stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, checking the reflection of his sunglasses in the window. He saw himself as the thin blue line between order and chaos, even if the chaos was just an old man with a milkshake. Sneed walked into the restaurant with that aggressive chest-out swagger that bad cops mistake for command presence. The air in the restaurant changed instantly. Conversation stopped. People looked down at their trays. Sneed scanned the room, ignoring the families and the workers. Kyle Vance, the manager, practically ran out from behind the counter to meet him. "Over there, officer," Kyle said, pointing an accusatory finger at the corner booth. "He refused to leave. He's been here close to an hour, just loitering. I asked him to go, and he got aggressive with me." "Aggressive?" Sneed asked, his hand drifting near his holster. "Did he threaten you?" He looked at me like he wanted to hit me." Kyle embellished, playing the victim. "And he's got a weapon, that big metal stick." Sneed looked at the cane leaning against the table. In his mind, it transformed from a mobility aid into a deadly weapon. He nodded to Kyle. "I got this." Sneed marched across the dining room. He didn't approach Elias from the front. He came up on his blind side, standing over the table to maximize the intimidation factor. Elias was looking at his phone, reading a text from Martha in line to pay. 5 minutes. "Let's go, time to move on." Sneed barked, not bothering with a greeting. Elias looked up, startled but composed. He saw the name tag D. Sneed. He saw the body language, bladed stance, hand on the belt, chin tucked. Elias knew the posture. He had trained military police for years. This was the posture of someone looking for a fight. "Excuse me, officer," Elias said, his voice deep and steady. "You heard me. Manager wants you gone. That means you're trespassing. Grab your stuff and walk, or I drag you out." "I'm waiting for my wife," Elias said, keeping his hands visible on the table. "I bought this food. I haven't done anything wrong." "I don't care what you bought," Sneed interrupted, leaning in closer, invading Elias's personal space. "When the manager says go, you go. You're making people nervous." Elias looked around. A young mother at the next table looked terrified not of Elias, but of the shouting police officer. "The only person making people nervous is you, officer. I'm a disabled veteran. I can't just grab my stuff and walk that fast. My leg is stiff." "Don't give me that sob story," Sneed sneered. "I see guys like you every day. Fake limp, fake service stories looking for a handout. You got ID prove you belong here. I don't need to prove I belong in a burger joint, Elias said, his patience thinning. But if you want ID, I can show you. Do it, now. Sneed was operating on pure confirmation bias. He saw a black man in a fast food place who didn't jump when ordered. Therefore, the man was a criminal. He ignored the clean clothes. He ignored the calm demeanor. He ignored the fact that Elias was older than his own father. Sneed had decided the outcome of this encounter before he even walked through the door. He wasn't investigating a trespassing complaint. He was enforcing a social hierarchy where he was at the top and Elias was at the bottom. And he was about to find out just how wrong he was. Elias reached slowly for his wallet. He knew the drill. Sudden movements got you shot, especially with officers like this. He pulled out his wallet and extracted his blue Department of Defense retiree identification card, the DD Form 2, the gold standard of military ID. It had his rank, CSM, USA, retired. It had his service number. It was chipped and holographic. He placed it on the table and slid it toward Sneed. Command Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, United States Army retired. That's a federal ID officer. Sneed picked it up, barely looking at it. He flipped it over in his fingers like a playing card. He had never served. He barely knew the difference between a sergeant and a colonel. To him, the blue card looked different from a Georgia driver's license, and different meant fake. What is this junk? Sneed scoffed, tossing the card back onto the table with a clatter. I said real ID, driver's license, state ID, not something you printed off the internet. Elias's jaw tightened. That is a valid government identification. If you don't recognize it, that's a training failure on your part, not a legal failure on mine. Call your supervisor if you don't know what it is. I don't need a supervisor to tell me you're a fraud. Sneed shouted, his voice cracking with rage. He felt the eyes of the restaurant on him. People had their phones out now. He was losing control of the narrative, and his response was to escalate force. Stand up. You're under arrest for trespassing and obstruction. I can't stand up without my cane, Elias stated flatly. I said stand up. Sneed reached down, grabbed Elias by the left arm, the arm on his bad side, and yanked. Pain shot through Elias's hip, a white-hot lightning bolt that dated back to a dusty road in Iraq. He groaned instinctively, bracing himself. Sneed took this as resistance. Stop resisting! Sneed screamed for the benefit of the cameras. He kicked the cane away. It skittered across the tile floor, clattering under a nearby table. Without his support, Elias crumbled. He didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because his leg didn't work. He collapsed to one knee. Sneed didn't hesitate. He jumped on Elias's back, driving his knee into the veteran's spine, forcing him flat onto the greasy floor. You're making a mistake, a customer yelled. He's an old man. Back off, Sneed yelled at the crowd, his hand resting on his taser. He grabbed Elias's wrists and wrenched them behind his back. Elias's shoulders, stiff with age and old injuries, screamed in protest. The handcuffs ratcheted shut, clicking tight, too tight. You are arresting a disabled veteran. Elias gritted out his face, pressed against the cold tile. You are violating the Americans with Disabilities Act and my civil rights. Shut up! Sneed panted, hauling Elias up. Because Elias didn't have his cane, he stumbled. Sneed dragged him, literally dragged a Silver Star recipient across the floor of a Liberty Burger like a sack of potatoes. Elias didn't fight. He didn't curse. He maintained a tactical silence. He was memorizing everything. The time, the pain, the officer's name, the manager smirking in the background. The shame of being manhandled in public was burning in his chest, but the discipline of 30 years held him together. He knew the battlefield had just shifted. It wasn't about physical force anymore. It was about the law. And Officer Sneed had just walked into a minefield. The ride to the precinct was 12 minutes of silence. Sneed drove aggressively, braking hard, trying to jostle his prisoner. Elias sat in the back, the hard plastic seat digging into his handcuffed wrists. his bad leg throbbing with a dull, sickening ache. He focused on his breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. When they arrived at the precinct, Sneed pulled Elias out of the car. Elias stumbled again without his cane. "Walk straight," Sneed commanded, shoving him toward the intake door. They walked into the booking area. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Miller. Miller was 55, a black man with graying temples and eyes that had seen everything. He was a good cop, the kind who knew the neighborhood kids by name. He looked up as Sneed dragged Elias in. Miller's eyes went wide. He didn't see a criminal. He saw a man who carried himself with military bearing despite the handcuffs. He saw the ranger hat. He saw the pain in the man's gait. "Sneed, what the hell do you have there?" Miller asked, standing up. "Trespassing at Liberty Burger," Sneed said, puffing a little. "Refused to leave. Resisted arrest. Presented false ID." "False ID?" Miller frowned. He looked at Elias. "Sir, are you injured?" "My cane was kicked away by this officer." Elias said, his voice calm but icy. "I have a prosthetic hip and shrapnel damage, and the ID in my pocket is not false, Sergeant." Miller walked around the desk. "Let me see the ID." Sneed fished the blue card out of Elias's pocket and handed it to Miller with a smirk. "Look at this garbage. Says he's a command sergeant major. Probably never made it past boot camp." Sergeant Miller took the card. He looked at it. Then he looked at Sneed with an expression that was a mix of disbelief and horror. Miller had served in the Marines before joining the force. He knew exactly what he was holding. "Sneed." Miller said, his voice dangerously low. "Take the cuffs off." "Cuffs. Now." "What, Sarge? I said take them off." Miller roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "This is a Department of Defense retiree card. This man is a command sergeant major. Do you have any idea what that means? Do you have any idea what the Silver Star is?" Sneed froze. The color drained from his face. I thought it was fake." "You thought wrong. You arrested a war hero for eating a burger. Uncuff him." Sneed fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. The handcuffs clicked open. Elias rubbed his wrists where the skin was broken and bleeding. "I need my cane," Elias said softly. "And I need to call my wife. She's wondering where I am." Miller looked at Sneed. "Go get his cane. It's at the scene. Send a unit to get it. Now." As Sneed scrambled away, terrified for the first time, the precinct captain walked in, drawn by the shouting. Captain Reynolds listened to Miller's briefing. His face turned ashen. "Agent Monroe from the FBI is already on the phone," the captain said, looking at Elias. "Apparently the video is already online. It has 2 million views." Elias stood there, leaning on the booking desk for support. "Captain, your officer assaulted me. He kidnapped me. He violated my rights. I want his badge number and I want a lawyer." "You'll have everything you need, Sergeant Major," the captain said, looking at the floor. "On behalf of this department, I cannot express how sorry I am." "Sorry doesn't fix my hip," Elias said. "And sorry doesn't teach that boy respect." The fallout wasn't just a wave, it was a tsunami. The video filmed by the young mother at the next table showed everything. It showed Elias sitting calmly. It showed Sneed's aggression. It showed the cane flying across the room. It showed the knee in the back. The audio was crystal clear. "I served this country for 30 years. By the time Elias was released, driven home by the captain himself, news trucks were already parked on his lawn. But Elias didn't speak to them yet. He went inside, hugged a frantic Martha, and sat in his recliner with an ice pack on his hip. The internet, however, was speaking for him. Veterans groups mobilized instantly. The hashtag Justice for CSM Thorne trended #1 globally. Liberty Burger's corporate stock dipped 4% in 24 hours. Kyle Vance was the first domino to fall. Corporate didn't even wait for an investigation. They watched the video, saw him lie to the officer, and fired him via email before the sun went down. Liberty Burger issued a statement condemning the manager's actions and pledging a donation to veterans' charities, but the public saw it for what it was: damage control. The Seattle Police Department, or rather the Savannah PD in this version, tried to hold the line, but the evidence was overwhelming. Officer Sneed's past came to light. The 7 previous complaints, the racial profiling allegations that had been swept under the rug. This time, there was no rug big enough. 3 days later, the press conference was held. The police chief announced that Derek Sneed had been terminated for cause violating the oath of office, excessive use of force, and conduct unbecoming. He was also decertified, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state of Georgia again. But that wasn't enough. Elias's lawyer, a shark of a civil rights attorney named David Cohen, filed a federal lawsuit. The charges were blistering: violation of the Fourth Amendment, battery, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The city attorneys took one look at the case file. They looked at the video of Sneed kicking a disabled man's cane away. They looked at Elias's service record, a man who had protected the very freedoms Sneed had trampled on. "We can't go to trial," the lead city attorney told the mayor. "If a jury sees that video, they won't just award him damages. They'll give him the key to the city and the courthouse deed. We have to settle." 10 months later, the settlement was finalized. The city of Savannah agreed to pay Elias Thorne $6.5 million. Liberty Burger settled separately for an undisclosed sum rumored to be in the high 6 figures. Derek Sneed was working security at a warehouse in a different county, earning barely above minimum wage. His name was forever linked to the video. Every time he applied for a better job, they Googled him, and the interview ended. He had lost his career, his pension, and his reputation. Elias sat on his front porch. It was a Tuesday, much like the one that had started it all. He had a new cane, hand-carved hickory, a gift from a local woodworking guild. He looked out at the street, at the quiet neighborhood he had fought to protect. He didn't buy a fancy car with the money. He set up college funds for his grandkids. He donated $1 million to a legal defense fund for veterans who had been wrongfully arrested. He paid off the mortgages of 3 families on his block. He turned to the camera crew that had come for the 1 year later interview. The reporter asked him, "Sergeant Major, do you forgive Officer Sneed?" Elias looked into the lens. His eyes were tired but clear. "Forgiveness is between him and God," Elias said slowly. "My job was to ensure he never does that to anyone else again. You see, folks, it's not just about one bad apple. It's about the basket that keeps the apple safe until it rots everything else. I had a silver star and a federal ID, and it didn't save me from bias. Imagine what happens to the young man who has nothing but the truth on his side." He tapped his cane on the porch floor. "We have to be better. We have to demand that those with a badge carry the weight of it responsibly. Because if we don't hold them accountable, we aren't citizens. We're just subjects." The screen fades to black. This story isn't just about a settlement. It's about dignity. It's about the fact that honor can't be taken away by handcuffs, and shame can't be hidden behind a badge. What do you think? Should police officers be required to carry personal liability insurance so the taxpayers don't foot the bill for their mistakes? And should making a false 911 call based on race be a federal crime? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe in justice for our veterans, hit that like button and subscribe. We'll keep bringing you the truth.
Every preserved artifact and document tells a highly compelling story about the human experience. Ultimately, every story is an ongoing, rigorous quest for absolute clarity and truth. We are deeply grateful that you have chosen to embark on this intellectual pursuit with us.